Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're traveling back to 1862 to uncover the incredible story of two black twins who were labeled as gifted after a series of examinations left even seasoned observers completely without answers. But the thing that truly made them famous wasn't simply their remarkable ability. It was the impossible secret hidden just beneath the surface of those results. A secret that was never intended to be captured on paper. This is a difficult story, an intense one, so take a moment, breathe, and listen closely. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know which city and country you're tuning in from. Your support is what keeps these stories alive instead of letting them get buried. Let's begin. On the morning of September 14, 1862, in a quiet fishing village called Marblehead, on the coast of Massachusetts, two black children sat opposite a white doctor. He had traveled nearly 40 miles from Boston just to meet them. The doctor's name was Nathaniel Warren. At 53 years old, he had dedicated his entire career to studying the human mind at Harvard Medical School. He had examined hundreds of patients over the years. He had published papers in medical journals across both America and Europe. He had witnessed things most people would never believe possible. But he had never seen anything quite like the Carter twins. The children were just 8 years old. Their names were Elijah and Ruth. They sat perfectly motionless in their wooden chairs, hands folded neatly in their laps, their dark eyes fixed on the doctor with an intensity that frankly made him uneasy. They didn't fidget. They didn't glance away. They simply observed him, almost as if they were the ones conducting the examination. Dr. Warren opened his leather bag and carefully removed a series of cards. Each one featured a different mathematical problem. He had designed these himself, arranging them in order from easiest to most difficult. The early cards were simple addition. The final ones contained calculations that would give most university professors a hard time, even with pen and paper in hand. He handed the first card to the boy, Elijah. "Tell me the answer," Dr. Warren instructed. Elijah glanced at the card, maybe for half a second. 23, he replied. Correct. Dr. Warren passed him the second card. Before the doctor could even fully pull his hand back, Elijah answered. 57, correct again. Card after card they went through, the problems growing steadily more complex with each one. Addition turned into subtraction. Subtraction became multiplication. Multiplication shifted to division. Division evolved into multi-step problems involving multiple operations. Elijah answered every single one without hesitation. No pausing. No doubt. No mistakes. When they reached the final card, a problem that had taken Dr. Warren himself nearly 3 minutes to solve when he first created it, Elijah looked at the numbers for about 2 seconds. 439, he stated. Dr. Warren just stared at the boy. He checked his answer key. He checked it a second time. That is correct, he finally whispered, his voice barely audible. Then he turned to the girl, Ruth, and pulled out a different set of materials from his bag. These weren't math problems. They were pages of text copied from books Dr. Warren had carefully chosen because they would be completely unfamiliar to any child. One page came from a medical textbook written entirely in Latin. Another was from a legal document packed with archaic terminology. A third was from a philosophical treatise using vocabulary far beyond what any 8-year-old would reasonably understand. He handed the Latin text to Ruth. "Read this," he said. Ruth looked at the page. She didn't know Latin. She had never studied it. She had never even seen Latin text before that moment. But as she looked at the words, something happened. Slowly at first, she started to sound them out, and then with growing confidence, she continued. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but it was understandable. And even more remarkably, after finishing each sentence aloud, she would pause and offer a guess about its meaning based on the patterns she noticed in the words. Several of those guesses were correct. Dr. Warren sat back in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. In 30 years of medical practice, he had never witnessed anything like this. He had heard rumors of children with extraordinary mental abilities, sure, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerations or outright hoaxes. This was neither. He looked at the twins' mother, a woman named Sarah Carter, who stood quietly in the corner of the small room, watching everything with an expression that mixed pride and fear. "Mrs. Carter," he asked, "how long have your children been able to do these things?" Sarah Carter was 31 years old. She had been born free in Massachusetts, the daughter of a black sailor and a Native American woman. For most of her life, she had worked as a domestic servant, cleaning houses and washing clothes for white families who paid her barely enough to scrape by. She had known her children were different since they were 3 years old. That was when Elijah started counting everything he saw, adding and multiplying numbers from daily life, figuring out some Sarah couldn't even verify. That was when Ruth began memorizing entire books after hearing them read aloud just once, reciting passages word for word weeks or even months later. Sarah had tried to hide her children's abilities. She understood, in a way no white person could fully grasp, just how dangerous it was for black children to appear too intelligent in America. In 1862, the country was at war. The Civil War had started in April of 1861, and now, 18 months later, the fighting showed no signs of stopping. President Abraham Lincoln hadn't yet issued the Emancipation Proclamation. In the southern states, 4 million black people remained enslaved. In the North, free black people existed in a fragile space, tolerated, but not truly accepted, free, but certainly not equal. A black child who could read was already seen as dangerous. A black child who could outthink white adults. That was simply unthinkable. For 5 years, Sarah had managed to keep her children's abilities hidden. She told them repeatedly they must never reveal what they could do. They had to pretend to be ordinary. They had to conceal their gifts. But secrets have a way of slipping out. 3 weeks before Dr. Warren's visit, a white merchant named Thomas Aldrich had come to Sarah's small house to deliver fabric she had ordered for her sewing work. While Sarah was in the back room counting out coins to pay him, the merchant noticed Elijah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a newspaper someone had left behind. The merchant laughed. "Can you even read that, boy?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Elijah looked up at him. "Yes," he replied simply. "And there's an error in the 3rd paragraph." The reporter wrote that Union forces captured 300 Confederate soldiers at the Battle of Antietam. But if you calculate based on the numbers given earlier in the article, the correct figure should be 347. Thomas Aldrich just stared at the boy for a long moment. Then he picked up the newspaper and read the 3rd paragraph himself. He did the calculations. The boy was right. Without another word, the merchant left the house. But within days, the story had spread through Marblehead. The black woman's children could read. The black woman's children could calculate. The black woman's children had minds that seemed impossible to explain. Dr. Warren had heard the story from a colleague, who heard it from a patient, who heard it from a neighbor. At first, he dismissed it as gossip, but something about it stayed with him, nagging at him, refusing to let go. So he made the journey to Marblehead. And now he sat across from 2 children who had just demonstrated abilities that challenged everything he thought he understood about the human mind. "Mrs. Carter," he repeated, "I need to know. How long have your children been able to do these things? And how is it possible?" Sarah Carter looked at her children. She looked at the doctor. She understood that whatever she said next would change their lives permanently. "They have always been this way," she said quietly. "Since before they could walk, before they could talk. They see things other people can't see. They understand things other people can't understand. I don't know why. I don't know how. I only know it's true." Dr. Warren nodded slowly. In his mind, he was already composing the letter he would write to his colleagues at Harvard. He was already imagining the examinations, the papers, the lectures. He didn't notice the fear in Sarah Carter's eyes. He didn't realize he was about to make her children visible in a world that punished black people simply for being seen. News of the Carter twins spread faster than Sarah had ever anticipated. Within a week of Dr. Warren's visit, 3 more doctors had arrived in Marblehead to examine the children. Within 2 weeks, a reporter from the Boston Evening Transcript showed up, asking questions and scribbling notes. Within a month, the story had appeared in newspapers all across New England. The headlines varied. The Boston Evening Transcript ran a piece titled, "Remarkable Negro Children Display Unusual Mental Faculties." The article was cautiously admiring, describing the twins' abilities in detail while carefully avoiding any suggestion that this might indicate racial equality. The Springfield Republican offered a different angle. Their headline read, "Scientific Mystery, How Can Such Minds Exist in Such Bodies?" The article treated the twins more like curiosities, specimens for study rather than children to be admired. The Providence Journal went even further with "Nature's Impossibility Made Manifest," suggesting the twins' abilities must stem from some unknown biological anomaly, a freak occurrence that proved nothing about the general capacities of the Negro race. But there were other reactions too. The Liberator, an abolitionist newspaper published in Boston by William Lloyd Garrison, ran a front-page story. The headline was simple and direct, "Proof of Human Equality." The article argued that the Carter twins demonstrated exactly what abolitionists had always claimed, that mental differences between races came from circumstance and education, not inherent biological inferiority. That article changed everything. William Lloyd Garrison was one of the most famous abolitionists in America. He had been publishing The Liberator since 1831, and his newspaper reached anti-slavery activists across the country and around the world. When he wrote about the Carter twins, people paid attention. Donations began arriving at Sarah Carter's small house. Letters came from strangers offering help. Schools and tutors offered to educate the children for free. Churches and lecture halls invited the twins to appear before their congregations and audiences. But other things arrived too. Threats came in the mail. Anonymous letters warned Sarah that her children would be harmed if they kept attracting attention. At night, rocks were thrown through her windows. A dead cat was left on her doorstep with a note that read simply, "Know your place." The people of Marblehead, who had lived alongside Sarah Carter for years, began treating her differently. Neighbors who had once been friendly now crossed the street to avoid her. Customers who had hired her for sewing and laundry work suddenly found other seamstresses. The white families who had employed her as a domestic servant let her go one by one until she had no income left. Sarah understood what was happening. Her children's intelligence had upset the natural order. White people in Marblehead had been willing to tolerate a black family living among them as long as that family remained inferior, dependent, subservient. But the twins' abilities hinted at something white people couldn't accept, the possibility that black minds might actually equal white minds. That possibility was far more threatening than any physical danger. It undermined the entire justification for slavery. It challenged the whole structure of American society. It forced white people to question things they had been taught since birth. So they responded the only way they knew how. They tried to destroy what they couldn't understand. In November of 1862, Sarah Carter made a heartbreaking decision. She sent her children away. Dr. Warren had arranged for the twins to enroll at the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. The school, founded in 1837 by a Quaker named Richard Humphreys, was one of the few places in America offering advanced education to black students. They accepted Elijah and Ruth on full scholarship, with room and board provided by a wealthy abolitionist family. Sarah couldn't go with them. She had no money for the journey. She had no way to support herself in Philadelphia. And she knew that leaving Marblehead meant losing everything she had built over the past decade, the rented house, the few possessions she owned, the fragile stability she had fought so hard to achieve. So she said goodbye to her children on a cold November morning at Marblehead Harbor. She held them both tightly against her chest and told them things she had never said before. "You are special," she whispered. "Not because of what you can do with your minds. You are special because you are my children. Because you are good, and kind, and strong. Because you have survived in a world that didn't want you to survive." She pulled back and looked at their faces, memorizing every detail. "The world will try to use you," she continued. "White people will want to parade you before audiences. They'll want to study you like animals. They'll want to prove their theories about race, one way or another, using your minds as evidence." She took their hands in hers. Don't let them, she said firmly. You are not evidence. You are not specimens. You are not proof of anything except your own existence. You are human beings. You deserve to be treated as human beings. Anyone who treats you as anything less doesn't deserve your cooperation. Elijah and Ruth boarded the ship bound for Philadelphia. They stood at the railing and watched their mother grow smaller and smaller until she finally disappeared from view. They didn't cry. They had learned in their 8 years of life that crying changed nothing. They simply watched, and they remembered. The Institute for Colored Youth stood on Lombard Street in Philadelphia, in a neighborhood that had been home to free black people for generations. The school occupied a 3-story brick building that once served as a warehouse. Inside, classrooms had been carved out of the open space, furnished with donated desks and chairs, lined with shelves of books collected over decades of operation. When Elijah and Ruth arrived in December of 1862, the school enrolled about 120 students, ranging in age from 6 to 22. Most were children of free black families who had lived in Philadelphia for years. Some were escaped slaves who had made their way north through the Underground Railroad. All of them shared the same purpose: to receive an education the white world didn't want them to have. The principal was a man named Ebenezer Bassett. He was 38 years old, a graduate of Connecticut State Normal School, and one of the first black Americans to receive a college education. He had led the institute since 1857, and under his guidance, it had become one of the finest educational institutions for black students in the country. When Mr. Bassett first met the Carter twins, he did what Dr. Warren had done. He tested them. But his tests were different. He didn't care about calculations or memory tricks. He cared about understanding. He sat with the twins in his office and asked them questions, not math questions, not reading questions, questions about the world itself. "Why do you think there is a war happening in this country?" he asked. Elijah and Ruth exchanged a glance. Over the years, they had learned to communicate without speaking. A single look between them could convey whole conversations. Ruth answered first. "Because people believe things that aren't true," she said. "They believe some people are worth more than others. They believe the color of someone's skin tells you something about the content of their mind. They believe these things because believing them makes it easier to do terrible things without feeling guilty." She paused. "The war is about slavery," she continued. "But slavery is about belief. If people stopped believing black people were inferior, slavery couldn't exist. The war is really a war about what people believe." Mr. Bassett sat back in his chair. He had been teaching for nearly a decade. He had encountered many intelligent students, but he had never heard an 8-year-old speak with such clarity about such complex matters. "And you, Elijah," he asked, "what do you think?" Elijah considered the question carefully. "I think my sister is right," he said finally. "But I think there's something else too. I think the war is also about money. The people who own slaves are rich because they don't have to pay for labor. If slavery ends, they'll lose their money. And people will do almost anything to keep their money." He looked at Mr. Bassett with those intense dark eyes. "I think the war won't end until one side has no money left to fight," he added. "And I think many, many people will die before that happens." Mr. Bassett nodded slowly. He understood now why Dr. Warren had been so astonished. These children didn't just have powerful minds, they had powerful understanding. They could see the world with a clarity most adults never achieved. But he also understood something Dr. Warren had missed. These children were in danger. Their intelligence made them valuable to people who wanted to use them. It also made them threatening to people who wanted to maintain the existing order. They would be sought after and hunted, celebrated and despised. They would never be allowed to simply live their lives in peace. In that moment, Mr. Bassett made a decision. He would protect these children. He would educate them. He would prepare them for the world they would face. And he would teach them something no one else could: how to survive. The years at the Institute for Colored Youth transformed Elijah and Ruth. They studied mathematics with a teacher named Octavius Catto, a young black man who would later become one of the most important civil rights activists in Philadelphia's history. They studied literature with Fanny Jackson, who would eventually become the first black woman to lead an institution of higher education in America. They studied science, history, languages, and philosophy with teachers who were among the finest black educators of their generation. But more importantly, they learned to control their gifts. Mr. Bassett understood that raw intelligence without wisdom could be dangerous. He had seen bright young black men and women destroyed by white jealousy, their talents making them targets rather than assets. Elijah and Ruth would need more than intellectual ability to survive. They would need judgment. They would need restraint. They would need the wisdom to know when to reveal their abilities and when to hide them. He taught them these lessons through careful instruction. Your minds are like weapons, he told them one evening in his office. A weapon that's always visible invites attack. A weapon that's hidden can be used when the time is right. He leaned forward in his chair. There will be moments when you must show what you can do. There will be moments when powerful people need to see your abilities. But there will also be moments when showing your abilities will only bring you harm. You must learn to recognize the difference. The twins listened carefully. They had already started understanding this lesson through their own experience. They had seen how their intelligence had destroyed their mother's life in Marblehead. They had seen how white people reacted when confronted with black minds that exceeded their own. They practiced hiding in plain sight. They learned to give answers that were correct but not too correct. They learned to display knowledge that was impressive but not threatening. They learned to read the reactions of white people and adjust their behavior accordingly. It was exhausting. It was degrading. But it was necessary. Meanwhile, the war continued. In January of 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in Confederate states free. The news spread through Philadelphia's black community like wildfire. People celebrated in the streets. Churches held services of thanksgiving. For the first time in American history, the federal government had declared slavery wrong. But the celebration came with caveats. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in states actively rebelling. It didn't free slaves in border states that had stayed in the Union. It didn't grant citizenship to freed slaves. It didn't give black people the right to vote. And it didn't end the war. The fighting continued through 1863 and into 1864. The battles grew larger and more terrible: Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Chickamauga. The names became synonymous with death on a scale Americans had never experienced. Elijah followed the war obsessively. He collected newspapers and created maps showing army positions. He calculated casualty figures and supply logistics. He predicted battle outcomes based on available information. His predictions were remarkably accurate. In March of 1864, when he was 10 years old, he wrote a letter to a military officer named Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who had commanded the famous 54th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black regiments in the Union Army. Colonel Shaw had been killed at the Battle of Fort Wagner in July of 1863, but Elijah didn't know that when he wrote. The letter was returned to the Institute with a note explaining Colonel Shaw was dead. But someone had read Elijah's letter before returning it, and that someone had been impressed enough to share it with others. The letter contained Elijah's analysis of the war. He argued the Union would win, but only if it adopted specific strategies. He suggested focusing on cutting Confederate supply lines rather than capturing territory. He recommended using black soldiers more extensively, not just for their numbers but for their motivation. He predicted the war would end sometime in 1865 if these strategies were followed. The letter eventually reached a newspaper editor in Boston who had known Colonel Shaw. The editor published it under the headline, "A Child's Wisdom on the War." The article noted that the letter had been written by a 10-year-old black boy at the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. Once again, the Carter twins appeared in newspapers, and once again, trouble followed. In April of 1864, a group of white men came to the Institute for Colored Youth. There were 5 of them. They wore expensive suits and spoke with Southern accents. They claimed to be businessmen from Maryland, a border state where slavery remained legal. They said they had heard about the remarkable Negro children and wanted to see them for themselves. Mr. Bassett met them at the school door. He didn't like what he saw. These men had the look of slave catchers, the men who made their living hunting escaped slaves and returning them to bondage. "The children you're asking about are not escaped slaves," Mr. Bassett stated. "They were born free in Massachusetts. They are here legally under my protection, with the full support of this institution." The leader of the group, a tall man with a gray beard and cold eyes, smiled without warmth. "We're not suggesting otherwise," he said smoothly. "We simply wish to meet these children. We've heard so much about them. Surely a brief visit would cause no harm." Mr. Bassett stood firm. "The children are not available for visits," he replied. "They are students at this school. Their education is my responsibility. And I do not believe your interest in them is academic." The men exchanged glances. Something passed between them, a silent communication Mr. Bassett didn't like. "Very well," the leader said. "Perhaps we'll return another time." They left without further incident. But Mr. Bassett knew they would be back. That night, he called Elijah and Ruth to his office. "Do you know who those men were?" he asked. The twins looked at each other. Ruth spoke first. "They weren't businessmen," she said. "They were looking at us the way buyers look at merchandise. They want something from us, something specific." Elijah nodded. "They were also lying about being from Maryland," he added. "Their accents were wrong. One of them slipped and used a phrase common in South Carolina, not Maryland. I think they were from further south." Mr. Bassett wasn't surprised by their observations. He had learned to trust their perceptions. "I think they may try to take you," he said quietly. "I don't know for certain, but I believe they see you as valuable property. Children with minds like yours would be worth a lot of money to certain people, scientists who want to study you, circus owners who want to display you. Or worse." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm going to send you somewhere safe," he continued. "There's a community in Ohio, near a town called Oberlin. It's a stronghold of abolitionist sentiment. The college there has been admitting black students for decades. There's a network of people who protect escaped slaves and free black people in danger. You'll be safe there." The twins didn't argue. They understood the danger. They understood that their minds, which should have been their greatest asset, had become a liability in a world not ready to accept black intelligence. 2 days later, they boarded a train heading west. They didn't know it yet, but they wouldn't return to Philadelphia for many years. They wouldn't see Mr. Bassett again. And the men in expensive suits wouldn't stop looking for them. The journey to Ohio took 4 days. The twins traveled with a woman named Harriet Tubman. Not the famous Harriet Tubman who had led hundreds of slaves to freedom through the Underground Railroad. This was a different woman using the same name, a common practice among black people working in the Freedom Network. Using famous names provided cover and confusion, making it harder for slave catchers to track specific individuals. This woman was 40 years old, with strong hands and watchful eyes. She didn't speak much during the journey. She watched. She listened. She made sure no one was following them. They traveled by train when it was safe, by wagon when it wasn't. They stayed in houses displaying certain signs in the windows, signs indicating safe harbor for black travelers. They ate meals prepared by strangers who asked no questions and expected no thanks. On the 3rd night, while staying in a farmhouse in western Pennsylvania, the woman called Harriet sat down with the twins and told them things they needed to know. "You're being hunted," she said bluntly. "Not just by those men who came to your school. There are others. People who've heard about your abilities. People who want to use you for their own purposes." She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much. "Some of them want to study you. They think your minds can teach them something about race and intelligence. They want to cut you open and look at your brains. They want to measure your skulls and weigh your organs. They don't see you as children. They see you as specimens." Ruth felt a chill run through her body. She had known people looked at her differently. She hadn't known some wanted to dissect her. "Others want to display you," Harriet continued. They want to put you on stages and charge money for people to see the Negro children who can think. They dress you in fine clothes and teach you tricks and parade you before audiences like trained animals. They'd make you famous and make themselves rich. Elijah clenched his fists. He had always known his mind was different. He hadn't known it could be bought and sold like cotton or tobacco. And there are some, Harriet said, her voice dropping lower, who want to destroy you. They believe your existence threatens everything they hold dear. They believe if people see what you can do, if people believe black minds can equal white minds, then the whole system of slavery and segregation will collapse. They'd rather see you dead than see you prove them wrong. She leaned forward and took their hands. This is the world you live in, she said. This is the world you'll have to survive. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you it'll get better, but I can't promise that. All I can promise is that there are people who will help you. People who believe in freedom. People who will fight for you even when you can't fight for yourselves. She released their hands and stood up. Tomorrow we reach Ohio, she said. You'll be safe there. But you must remember what I've told you. You must never forget that you are hunted. And you must never stop running. The twins didn't sleep that night. They lay in their beds and stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything Harriet had said. They thought about their mother alone in Marblehead, not knowing where her children were or if they were safe. They thought about Mr. Bassett, who had protected them and taught them and then sent them away to protect them further. They thought about the men in expensive suits who wanted to take them. And they thought about the future, the long, uncertain, dangerous future stretching before them like an uncharted road. They were 10 years old. They had already lived through more than most people experience in a lifetime. And they understood, in a way no child should have to, that their lives would never be easy. Their gifts would never be fully appreciated. Their minds would always be seen as anomalies, exceptions, impossibilities. But they also understood something else. They understood they had each other. They had been born together, grown together, developed their extraordinary abilities together. Their minds worked differently together than apart. They could communicate without words. They could solve problems by dividing them between their two perspectives. They could protect each other in ways no one else could. This was their secret, not their intelligence, not their memory, not their ability to calculate or read or understand. Their secret was their bond. And as long as they had that bond, they would survive. Oberlin, Ohio, was unlike any place Elijah and Ruth had ever seen. The town had been founded in 1833 by Presbyterian ministers who believed in racial equality as a Christian duty. From its earliest days, Oberlin had welcomed black residents, black students, and escaped slaves seeking freedom. The college at the town center had been the first in America to regularly admit black students and women alongside white men. By 1864, when the Carter twins arrived, Oberlin had become the most racially integrated community in the United States. The twins were placed with a family named the Langstons. John Mercer Langston was a black lawyer educated at Oberlin College who had become one of the most prominent black leaders in Ohio. His wife, Caroline, was a teacher who ran a small school for black children in their home. They had 3 children of their own, and they welcomed Elijah and Ruth as if they were family. For the first time since leaving Marblehead, the twins felt something close to safety. But safety, they would learn, was always temporary. The first months in Oberlin focused on education. The twins enrolled in the preparatory department of Oberlin College, where students as young as 10 could begin studies leading to college admission. The curriculum was rigorous, designed to prepare students for the same education white students received at Harvard or Yale. For most students, it was challenging. For Elijah and Ruth, it wasn't challenging enough. Within weeks, their teachers recognized what Dr. Warren and Mr. Bassett had recognized before them. These children weren't ordinary students. Their minds operated on an entirely different level. They absorbed information at an impossible rate. They made connections between subjects their teachers had never considered. They asked questions revealing understanding far beyond their years. The head of the preparatory department, a stern New England woman named Professor Mary Jane Patterson, called the twins to her office after their first month of classes. Professor Patterson was remarkable herself. Born free in North Carolina, she had moved to Ohio as a child. In 1862, she became the first black woman in American history to earn a bachelor's degree, graduating from Oberlin College with honors. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to be a black person with an exceptional mind in a world unwilling to acknowledge black excellence. She sat behind her desk and studied the twins with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Your teachers have reported to me about your progress," she said. "They are astonished. They have never encountered students like you. They don't know what to do with you." The twins sat quietly, waiting. "I have seen your examination results," Professor Patterson continued. "You have mastered material design for students twice your age. You have done this in a matter of weeks. If you continue at this pace, you will exhaust our entire curriculum within a year or two." She leaned forward, expression serious. "This creates a problem," she said. "Not for you, for us. We don't have the resources to educate minds like yours. We don't have teachers who can challenge you sufficiently. We don't have textbooks advanced enough to hold your interest." Ruth spoke first. "What do you suggest we do?" Professor Patterson smiled slightly, a rare expression on her stern face. "I suggest we stop treating you as students," she said. "I suggest we start treating you as colleagues." This arrangement was unusual, perhaps unprecedented, but Professor Patterson had the authority to implement it, and she did. Beginning in their second month at Oberlin, Elijah and Ruth were no longer simply students. They attended classes when they chose, but they also gained access to the college library, where they could pursue whatever subjects interested them. They were invited to attend lectures meant for college students. They were encouraged to conduct their own research and share findings with faculty members working on similar questions. Elijah gravitated toward mathematics and military strategy. He spent hours in the library reading about Napoleon's campaigns, ancient generals' tactics, the principles of logistics and supply. He applied his mathematical mind to warfare problems, developing theories about optimal troop movements and resource allocation that his professors found remarkable. Ruth gravitated toward languages and history. She taught herself Greek and Hebrew in addition to the Latin she had begun learning. She read primary sources in their original languages, discovering nuances translations missed. She developed particular interest in slavery's history, tracing its roots through ancient civilizations, understanding how human bondage had evolved over millennia. Together, they began seeing the world in ways most people never would. But even in Oberlin, even surrounded by supporters, the twins couldn't escape reality. The men who had come to Philadelphia didn't give up their search. In March of 1865, 3 months before the Civil War ended, a stranger arrived in Oberlin asking questions. He was a white man in his 40s, well-dressed, with a polished manner suggesting education and wealth. He called himself Dr. Samuel Morton and claimed to be a scientist from Philadelphia conducting research on human intelligence. He said he had heard about 2 exceptional Negro children studying at Oberlin and wished to meet them for academic purposes. Dr. Morton wasn't who he claimed to be. The real Dr. Samuel Morton had been a Philadelphia physician who spent decades collecting human skulls and measuring them to prove white people had larger brains than black people. His work had justified slavery and racial discrimination. He had died in 1851, 14 years before this stranger arrived in Oberlin using his name. John Mercer Langston was first to recognize the deception. As a lawyer, he had learned to research people making claims, and he quickly discovered Dr. Samuel Morton was dead. He confronted the stranger at his hotel. "I don't know who you are," Langston said, "but I know who you are not. You are not Dr. Morton. Dr. Morton died 14 years ago. And I know what you want. You want the Carter children. You will not have them." The stranger's polished manner vanished. His face twisted into something ugly. "Those children are valuable," he said. "More valuable than you can imagine. There are people who will pay a great deal of money for minds like theirs. And there are other people who will pay a great deal of money to make sure minds like theirs are never seen again." He stepped closer to Langston, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You cannot protect them forever. Sooner or later, they will leave Oberlin. Sooner or later, they will be vulnerable. And when that happens, we will be waiting. He turned and walked away, leaving Langston standing in the hotel lobby with cold fear in his heart. That night, Langston gathered the twins and told them everything. He didn't soften the truth or try to protect them from danger. He believed they deserved to know what they faced. Ruth listened with calm expression masking churning emotions. "Who are these people?" she asked. "Who is paying them?" Langston shook his head. "I don't know for certain, but I have suspicions. There are wealthy men in the South who have made fortunes from slavery. The war is going badly for them. They know they're going to lose. They know slavery will end. And they're looking for ways to prove that even without chains, black people will remain inferior." He paused, choosing next words carefully. "Children like you are a threat to that belief," he said. "If you exist, if you can do what you do, then everything they believe is wrong. Some of them want to study you to find some explanation preserving their worldview. Others want to destroy you before you can prove them wrong." Elijah had been silent throughout. Now he spoke, voice steady despite fear. "What can we do?" he asked. Langston looked at him with respect. This child, this 11-year-old boy, was asking not how to hide, but how to fight. "For now, you can continue your studies," Langston said. "You can continue developing your minds. Knowledge is power, and the more you know, the more powerful you become. But you must also be careful. You must not draw unnecessary attention to yourselves. And you must be ready to move at a moment's notice if danger becomes too great." The twins nodded. They understood. They had been running since they were 8 years old. They would continue running as long as necessary. But someday, they knew, running wouldn't be enough. Someday they would have to stand and fight. The Civil War ended on April 9, 1865, when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. News reached Oberlin 3 days later. Church bells rang throughout town. People poured into streets celebrating, weeping, embracing strangers. After 4 years of bloodshed, after more than 600,000 deaths, the war was finally over. The Union had been preserved. Slavery had been destroyed. But celebration was short-lived. 5 days after Lee's surrender, on April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He died the following morning without regaining consciousness. Lincoln's death cast a shadow over everything. The man who had guided the nation through its darkest hour, who had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, who had promised to bind up the nation's wounds, was gone. In his place stood Andrew Johnson, a man from